Dipti is here with a look at the newspapers now on the programme. You're starting with reactions to the US withdrawing from the UN's Human Rights Council, aren't you, Dipti?
That's right. Goodbye. That's what the Huffington Post, the French version, said on its website this Wednesday. That decision, of course, came late on Tuesday, announced by Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the UN. She said they could no longer be part of a body that protects human rights abusers and is, quote, a cesspool of political bias, notably against Israel. Now, from the website Vox, we've seen a pretty interesting critical piece saying the move isn't entirely a surprise because it's something that the U.S. had been threatening to do for quite a while. It is in keeping, though, with the Trump trend of pulling out of international organizations and treaties. For this reason, the U.S. pulling out of the council will be viewed less as a steep criticism of an organization that admittedly is deeply flawed, and it'll be viewed more as an example, yet another example, of the U.S.'s growing international isolation. So that's how Vox sees it, and they do remind us quite subtly of the U.S.'s hypocrisy, because Trump has, after all, failed to address human rights abuses with leaders where his interests are more aligned with them, most recently with Kim Jong-Un in Singapore.
Conservative press, I suspect, thrilled about the decision, though.
Very thrilled. Let's start with the Times of Israel that talks about how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hailed the move as courageous. He branded the council biased, hostile and anti-Israel, calling it, as I said, a courageous decision against the hypocrisy and lies of the human rights body led by the UN. Now, from Fox News, one contributor there has also welcomed the move, calling it the right decision. Over the past year, he explains, the U.S. has tried time and time again to make the UN Human Rights Council work. And these efforts have been met with disinterest and hostility, notably from Europe. Pulling out, he says, does not mean the U.S. will abandon its commitment to human rights. But why, he says, should they be part of an organization that, I quote, spent exponentially more time on Israel than it did North Korea or Syria?
Let's move on to a story that's going to dominate the news, I suspect, of the weekend. Turkish voters heading to the polls this weekend in legislative and presidential elections.
And those elections were actually called by by Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan back in April. Now, the long-standing Turkish president is likely to be re-elected, but his party could lose its majority in parliament. And that's where it gets interesting. Hence this headline from the British daily The Independent. Is Erdogan's iron grip about to slip? Now, these elections are being touted as the most important in Turkey in recent times. And the Financial Times in this article here notes that Erdogan's party is showing signs of wear and tear, even if he's, quote, within tantalizing reach of his holy grail, a one-man rule that'll take him into, that'll see him a leader until 2023. Standing in his way, though, and this is something that the Hurriyet Daily, a Turkish paper, is looking at, standing in his way is the Kurdish People's Democratic Party. Now, they're hoping to exceed the 10% national threshold in order to enter parliament as a group, and this could put a spanner in the works for Erdogan's party. And the paper says there's actually a growing trend among voters to vote for this party, even if they don't really want it in parliament. It's more as an opposition move against Erdogan.
Now, the death of an Australian comedian. It's put under a spotlight the treatment of women and their security. This is in Australia, isn't it?
That's right. Eurydice Dixon, she's a Melbourne comedian who was killed a week ago. And in fact, ever since her death, there have been vigils across the country, silent vigils, candlelit vigils, that sort of thing. She was walking home through a park last week when she was brutally raped and murdered. Now, her death, as the Guardian Australian edition notes, has become something of a flashpoint for an intense and sometimes angry conversation around violence against women. In particular, the message being that men and not women need to change. And I guess the message for women is that they're fed up of being told to be careful or to take extra security measures. This message was actually echoed by the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull in Parliament this week, who urged communities to begin by educating boys.
And finally, from Dipti, Emmanuel Macron, he might not anymore be Donald Trump's BFF. best friend forever. That is, at least if the White House portraits are anything to go by.
That's right. This is from the French website Lubs, which reports that several White House journalists have astutely noted that Donald Trump's photos in the Oval Office have changed. Now, before there were a series of adoring pictures between Trump and Macron, including during his Paris trip last year. Well, it appears that maybe G7 tensions have put a dampener on their bromance. Macron has now been replaced by Kim Jong-Un, who we all know that Trump bonded with in Singapore last week. You, of course, know that firsthand, Stuart.
Yeah.
Worth noting, though, that these pictures are regularly changed, but journalists say the suspicious timing of Kim Jong-un replacing Macron as there were G7 tensions and just after that Singapore summit, they couldn't help but think maybe it was a deliberate move. In any case, it is proof that if ever you need to know if you're in Trump's good books, you just need to look at the photo frames in the White House.
Very similar characters, Emmanuel Macron, Kim Jong-Un.
Of course.
Of course, yeah. All right, thanks very much, Dipti Laurel with the papers off Rights 24. In the next half hour, of course, we've got our focus report for you. World Refugee Day today. We're reporting from one of the most closed countries in the world, Japan. Last year granted refugee status to just 20 people out of nearly 19,000 applicants. We're going to report on that in the next half hour.